We've all been there. Someone questions our choices, doubts our decisions, or pushes us to justify ourselves. And before we know it, we're over-explaining, giving details they don't need, and handing over our power. Over-explaining often feels like a way to be understood, but in reality, it chips away at our boundaries. The truth is, you don't owe everyone an explanation, and protecting your boundaries starts with knowing when enough is enough. Over-explaining often comes from a place deep within us, where we want to be seen, heard, and most importantly, accepted. It is not just about words, but about a need for approval that we carry into conversations and decisions. Think about the times you have said no to someone, but then immediately followed it up with 10 different reasons why, hoping they would understand you better, or at least agree with your explanation. That is the cycle of over-explaining. It feels safe in the moment because it tricks us into thinking that if we provide more context, more details, more justification, then people will validate our choices and not question us further. But underneath that habit lies a fear that we are not enough as we are, that our simple no or our short decision will not hold weight unless we build it up with extra words. When we catch ourselves doing this, it becomes clear that it is not confidence speaking, but insecurity asking for reassurance. We want others to like us, we want to avoid conflict, and we want to make sure no one feels let down by us, so we give them more than they asked for. And while that may sound generous, it is actually us surrendering our power without realizing it. The reality is that over-explaining is not about clarity, it is about approval. We confuse the two because they look similar on the surface. Clarity is giving enough information so the other person understands what we mean. Approval seeking is giving more information than necessary in the hope that they will not judge us, question us, or reject us. It is an easy trap to fall into because approval feels like connection, but connection built on over-explaining is fragile because it requires you to constantly give more and more of yourself in order to maintain it. That is exhausting, and it leaves you drained instead of empowered. It also sets a precedent that people can expect endless explanations from you whenever they disagree or want more from you. Over time, they stop respecting your first answer because they know you will keep talking until they are satisfied, and that is not a boundary, it is a performance. When we learn to recognize that over-explaining comes from a place of approval seeking, we can start to shift how we show up in conversations. Instead of giving away our confidence in the form of endless words, we can pause and remind ourselves that our voice has weight even when it is brief. A strong boundary does not need decoration. A no is a no. A decision is a decision. The more we layer it with extra reasons, the weaker it sounds, because people start to hear the insecurity underneath. They sense that you are trying to please them rather than stand firm in your own choice. And when people sense that, they push harder. They ask for more. They take advantage of the fact that you are willing to stretch your explanation to make them comfortable, even at the cost of your own comfort. Protecting yourself from that cycle starts with breaking the habit of seeking validation in every response. The approval you are looking for cannot come from another person's acceptance of your explanation. It can only come from the trust you build within yourself that what you say is enough on its own. The less you rely on others to validate your decisions, the more solid your boundaries become. Over-explaining may feel harmless, but it is a quiet way of handing your confidence over to someone else. To protect it, you must first realize that your worth is not in how well you can justify yourself, but in the fact that you do not need to at all. Every unnecessary detail that slips out of your mouth is like handing over a piece of your boundary. It may not feel like it in the moment because it seems harmless to add one more reason, one more explanation, one more attempt at softening the impact of your decision. But with every extra word, you are giving away control. A boundary is meant to be clear, firm, and respected. It is not meant to be defended with long explanations or surrounded with excuses. The moment you start piling on details, you send the message that your boundary is negotiable, that if they push just a little harder, you might bend or change your mind. That is why over-explaining drains your strength. It's not the words themselves, but the energy behind them. You are giving someone else permission to weigh in on your choices when those choices were never theirs to validate in the first place. Think about when you say no to a request. A simple no should be enough, but often it doesn't feel like it. You start adding layers. No, because I'm busy. No, because I have to do this other thing. No, because I really need some rest. You believe you're making your boundary stronger by showing how reasonable your refusal is, but you're actually weakening it. Why? Because the other person now has room to argue with your reasons. If you said no because you're busy, they'll try to convince you it won't take long. If you said no because you need rest, they'll argue that it won't be tiring. Suddenly, the conversation isn't about your boundary anymore. It's about their ability to poke holes in the reasons you gave. Every extra detail becomes a crack they can press against. The more you explain, the easier it becomes for them to keep pushing, and before you know it, the line you tried to draw has been erased by your own words. This is why it's so important to recognize how powerful restraint can be. Short, simple answers hold weight because they leave no gaps to exploit. They communicate that your decision isn't up for debate, it's just reality. When you practice giving fewer details, you take back control of the situation. You no longer give people access to your personal justifications, which are private and do not need to be dissected by anyone else. Protecting your boundaries is not about convincing people to agree with you, it's about standing firm, even if they don't. That strength comes from saying less, not more. It's about trusting that your choices are valid whether or not someone understands them fully. When you stop handing out unnecessary details, you stop handing out pieces of your power. The truth is, the urge to over-explain is often rooted in discomfort. Silence feels heavy, so we fill it with words. Doubt creeps in, so we overcompensate by giving reasons. We want to avoid disappointing others, so we try to dress our boundaries up with explanations to make them look kinder, softer, more acceptable. But a true boundary doesn't need to be dressed up. It doesn't need to be padded with justifications to make someone else feel better. The more you strip away the extra details, the more respect you invite. Not because people suddenly agree with you, but because they sense the confidence behind your words. They sense that you trust yourself enough to stand by your decisions without feeling the need to hand them a manual explaining why. That kind of confidence commands respect. It reminds others that your time, your energy, and your choices are yours to protect. And the less you explain, the more those boundaries remain intact. A short and clear response carries more strength than a long and winding explanation because it leaves no room for doubt, no cracks for negotiation, and no invitation for someone to step in and try to control the situation. When you train yourself to answer simply, you are signaling confidence, and confidence is what makes people stop and take your words seriously. A simple statement shows that you believe in your decision and that you don't need anyone else's approval to make it valid. When you add more words than necessary, you dilute the power of your answer. It's like pouring water into a drink until the flavor disappears. The meaning is still there, but it no longer feels bold or strong. Your words lose weight when they are buried under too many details, but when you keep them short, they land with impact. The challenge is that many people mistake length for clarity. They think that the more they say, the better others will understand them, when in reality, the opposite happens. Long explanations can confuse, distract, or even irritate the listener. But when you keep your response sharp and precise, there is nothing to misinterpret. A firm no is clearer than a page full of reasons why. A confident yes speaks louder than a string of conditions. This is the hidden power of simplicity. It doesn't just protect your boundaries, it communicates them in a way that leaves no space for doubt. People are more likely to respect what they clearly understand, and nothing is clearer than a short, direct answer. Another reason short answers are powerful is because they communicate authority. Think about leaders, mentors, or people you admire. When they speak, they don't justify themselves endlessly. They say what they mean and move on because their confidence speaks for them. You can feel the authority in their tone, not because they talk more, but because they talk less. Every word they choose is intentional, and that is what makes people listen. When you adopt that same approach in your own boundaries, you gain authority over your decisions. You are no longer seeking permission, you are stating your position. That shift alone changes how others respond to you. Instead of pushing against your words, they are more likely to pause and respect the firmness behind them. It also matters for your own mental peace. Every time you over-explain, you open yourself to self-doubt. You hear yourself giving all these reasons, and part of you begins to wonder if you are trying to convince yourself as much as the other person. That creates stress and second guessing because the more reasons you give, the more opportunities you create for someone to question you. But when you keep your response short and clear, you don't invite those extra doubts. You say what needs to be said and nothing more. And in doing so, you protect not just your boundary, but also your peace of mind. You give yourself permission to move forward without replaying the conversation in your head, wondering if you said too much or too little. Simplicity frees you from the weight of overthinking. The more you practice short, confident responses, the more natural it becomes to protect your boundaries this way. At first, it may feel uncomfortable to stop talking, to resist the urge to give one more reason, one more explanation. But over time, you'll notice how much lighter it feels. You'll notice how people begin to respect your words more, how they start to take you at face value instead of digging deeper. A short and clear response is not cold or rude, it is powerful. It is you owning your decisions without apology. It is you standing tall in your boundaries and showing that your choices are not up for debate. That strength doesn't come from saying more, it comes from saying less and trusting that less is enough. Protecting your boundaries requires being comfortable with the idea that not everyone will fully understand you, and that is one of the hardest truths to accept. Human nature pushes us to want to be understood, to want others to see our perspective, to recognize the thought and reasoning behind our decisions. That desire is natural, but when it becomes the driving force behind our words, it leads us into the trap of over-explaining. We start to believe that if we can just explain a little more, if we can give just a few more details, then people will nod in agreement and everything will feel resolved. But the reality is that some people will never fully understand you, not because you are unclear, but because they are not willing or able to. If you keep chasing their understanding, you lose sight of the fact that your boundary does not require their approval to exist. When you protect your boundaries by saying less, you are essentially telling yourself that being understood by others is not always the goal. The real goal is to respect yourself enough to know that your choices stand on their own. This shift is difficult because it goes against the habit of trying to smooth things over with words, but it is also incredibly freeing. You stop measuring the success of your boundaries by how well others accept them, and you begin to measure it by how firmly you can hold them, even in the face of disagreement or confusion. Boundaries are not about creating harmony for others. They are about creating peace for yourself. The moment you let go of the need for constant understanding, you stop giving away pieces of your confidence and you start keeping that strength within you. It is also important to realize that misunderstanding is not always a problem you need to solve. Sometimes people act confused or demand more explanation as a way to break down your boundary. They may say things like, "I don't get it, explain more," or "I just don't see why," but often what they really mean is, "I don't like your boundary and I want you to move it." If you are trapped in the habit of over-explaining, you will take their bait every time, pouring out more and more details in the hope that they will finally understand. And when they still don't, you feel frustrated, guilty, or pressured to give in. But if you are comfortable with not always being understood, their confusion loses its power over you. You realize that their lack of understanding is not your responsibility to fix. You hold your boundaries steady even if they frown, question, or walk away unsatisfied. Learning to be okay with not being fully understood also strengthens your self-trust. Each time you stop yourself from over-explaining, you prove to yourself that your decisions can stand without external validation. That builds an inner confidence that does not rely on anyone else. You begin to trust that you know your own reasons, and that is enough. You may notice that you stop rehearsing conversations in your head, trying to predict how to make someone see your side. You stop spending so much energy convincing and start spending more energy living in alignment with your boundaries. That shift allows you to focus on what truly matters: your well being, your time, and your values. When you become comfortable with not being fully understood, you also give others permission to do the same. People start to notice that you don't bend over backwards to explain yourself, and it inspires them to realize they don't need to either. It sets a quiet example of strength, showing that clarity does not come from endless words, but from confidence in your decisions. In many ways, the courage to not be fully understood is what protects your boundaries the most. It's what separates approval seeking from self respect. It's what transforms your no into something solid, something unshakable, something that does not require anyone else's agreement in order to be valid. The less you explain, the more respect you command, because respect is not built on how many reasons you can provide, but on how firmly you stand in what you say. People are quick to notice when you constantly try to justify yourself. They sense hesitation, they sense insecurity, and even if they do not mean to, they begin to take advantage of it. When you explain too much, you send the message that your choices are open for negotiation, that you are seeking permission rather than standing by your own decision. But when you give a short and confident response, you draw a clear line that tells people you are not here to be debated, you are here to be respected. It is not about being cold or distant. It is about knowing your own worth enough to recognize that your decisions are valid, even if no one else fully understands them. Respect grows in the space where boundaries are clear. Imagine someone telling you no without hesitation, without an essay of reasons, just a calm and simple no. You may not like it, but you respect it. The strength in their tone and the clarity in their words leave little room for argument. On the other hand, imagine someone saying no, but then quickly piling on explanation after explanation, almost apologizing with their words. You stop hearing their no and start hearing the reasons to argue against. That is the difference between respect and persuasion. One commands presence, the other begs for approval. The less you explain, the more your words carry weight, and people naturally treat you with a different kind of seriousness. There is also a psychological element to this. When people hear fewer details, they often fill in the blanks themselves, and more often than not, they assume those blanks with respect. A calm no without extra detail creates a sense of finality. It signals that you have already thought about your decision and that you are comfortable with it. People instinctively back off when they feel that kind of firmness, but when you flood them with reasons, they realize that you are still trying to convince them, which means they can still push. The moment you show that you are willing to over-explain, you invite them to test your boundaries. The less you say, the fewer opportunities they have to chip away at your resolve. This also applies in professional settings, friendships, and even family dynamics. In the workplace, the colleague who always justifies their every move is seen as less confident, even if they are highly capable. The one who answers with clarity and brevity is seen as a leader, someone who commands authority without having to fight for it. In friendships, the person who explains too much often becomes the one others lean on, because they know they can pressure them into bending. But the one who simply says no when they need to earns quiet respect, even if others don't always like it. With family, it can feel harder because emotions run deep, but the principle is the same. The moment you stop over-explaining, people eventually learn that your boundaries are not up for constant questioning. The less you explain, the more respect you also give yourself. You begin to trust your own decisions instead of waiting for someone else to validate them. That self-respect shows up in your tone, in your body language, and in the way others respond to you. It creates a loop where your confidence earns respect, and that respect reinforces your confidence. Every time you resist the urge to over-explain, you send yourself the message that your voice is enough, your decision is enough, and your boundary is enough. Over time, that becomes second nature, and people around you naturally adjust. They stop expecting endless explanations, and they start treating your words as final. That is the quiet power of speaking less. It commands respect without demanding it, and it protects your boundaries in the most natural way possible.